Have you ever written any songs about Quicksave?
I've written songs in Quicksave. Quite a lot of the early things were around that time, and that was I got a job. I got promoted at Quicksave to be in charge of the dairy section.
Okay.
So I was taking off the tills, but I used to have to go to work at 5 a.m.
Right.
So I'd be walking along, the sun coming up, listening to, Slits or Lou Reed, television, and maybe some minimalist classical music, and going in. I was in charge of the yogurts and this stuff, and I got put back on the tills because we had an inspection from the head office came in, and they're doing spot checks on the dates, and they found a Muller fruit corner that was something like 4 weeks out of date. They just so happened to be the one that he picked up, so it's like, get back on the tills. Yeah. So there was
obviously it developed a culture by then, in your housing estate. Yeah. Funny enough, though, I stacked shelves in press stores, which became Tesco's up Chester Road,
right?
And I was in charge of the tinned veg and the jars of paste, stuff like
paste,
that.
Beef paste, fish paste. Yeah, I loved working in the supermarket. It was great.
Touching on the shoplifters as well. I worked in River Island for a bit, and I remember everyone used to talk about the shoplifters, and I never actually saw them as a gang, but there were gangs of them going around in shops. I don't know if they still do now, and they were known to everybody. And I do remember a couple of times people coming in and just going to tea, and they were brazen as turn away, and they were just just shoving stuff in there.
Yeah.
And,
I worked at Dr. Bernardo's. Yeah. I think at one point I had 3 jobs, and I decided to get another job, voluntary. I just fancied it, you know. So I used to steam the clothes at Dr. Bernardo's, and it was really heartbreaking, really, because if we ever got any good clothes in, something like Levi's, they were gone within a matter of minutes.
By customers or by
by shoplifters.
Yeah. Right.
And I wrote a song about it actually called Charity Shop. I don't think it's right. I think you should stop stealing from the charity. It's very kind of almost like a nursery rhyme type song. But that was an early Futureheads song, And that kind of period in my life when I got into the working world was a very fruitful time. So I was still living at home, had a little bit of money, and started doing gigs, with my own band.
So what was it? What was it like playing those first few gigs? What did you like about it so much? So many people don't like playing gigs.
Well, it was just the fact that we'd formed and been rehearsing a couple of times a week in me mum and dad's garage, and we'd prepared a short set of I think 7 or 8 minutes, and we played our first gig at the Ditchburn Suite at the Ashby Cricket Club. It was organised by Richard Amundsen. His band at the time was called Pillbox. And they later went on to change their name to This Ain't Vegas, and they were a tremendous band. They made some great albums, and they were really great at what they did. But it was from that moment onwards of playing that first gig, suddenly this sense of empowerment and just kind of confidence and happiness really kind of rose out of that. It was like, wow, that was quite good. People quite liked it, and we did a gig there, and then we did one in the Royalty, and that was good. And then we had a bad gig at Liberties because the sound wasn't very good, but we kind of kept on.
But the Beats Happening gigs and the Boy Eater gigs were both run by really passionate young. They were promoters. But they weren't.
They were artists. They
were in bands.
Artist promoters. Yeah, they were doing it so that they had somewhere to play.
Yeah,
and they were kind of slightly different. I suppose James was not long to move away before Beats Happening really started. So it was almost like one took over from the other. Yeah. But they had the same purpose really, which was a kind of meeting point for.
And a similar crowd as well.
Yeah, but possibly. Although I don't remember the likes of. I don't know if Mavis ever played Beats Happening. Oh, they must have. But yeah, I mean, it was the characters were still there, and we'd all go to each other's gigs, and it was class.
Yeah,
you know.
What? But obviously, not every gig will have been as good as yours.
No.
I mean, Liberties was a strange one. You know, that at the time, there was still, you could still go and catch three young. You know, it was a place for young bands to start off, but it wasn't kind of run by.
It was £1 for trebles in there. £1 for 3 shots of vodka. That's I suppose it was in a different era.
Yeah.
But still.
No, it still doesn't
it's dangerous. Yeah. We used to end up in, practically unconscious in the back lane, Foolish days.
Yeah, remember we you played quite early days. Played for us at the Manakee with I think they were the new tellers. I don't know, or they were electronic.
Upstairs. Was it downstairs?
On the downstairs.
The Futureheads did.
Yeah. And no, sorry, was it the Beat Group?
Oh wow.
But the Bruces were playing there in under one of their guises.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that must have been the first time we had played at Manakee on the big stage. And I remember then it looked, I didn't know you personally, but it was very. There was a buzz, and I'm not sure where you were in your career, but it looked so polished in a kind of non-polished way, not contrived at all.
I think it's that thing about tempos in music, like if you're playing fast music, it's going to be a lot more apparent of your tightness or your slackness. Whereas if you do mid-tempo music, there's no chops, there's no stabs, there's no kind of intricacy there, really. You might have little changes now and then, whereas our changes were like every bar. So it was kind of pulling together these songs was, I guess, quite impressive in that way. And that was certainly something that we wanted to do. Yeah. Was kind of like we've been rehearsing hard, but the songs were very uncommercial. Yeah, really, kind of like avant-garde-ish, DIY, new wave punk, with random song topics. Yeah. Songs about Nazis falling in love. What else? All sorts, really. People stealing from charity shops, train tickets.
So how do you think it went from like say something put out very purposely, very kind of anti-commercial, to something achieving like a commercial success?
I think it was a kind of a changing of trends.
Yeah.
In the early noughties, the Strokes came along and really changed the world of music. Suddenly guitar music was viable again. I mean, if you think about it, there was only a couple of years when Britpop really became very stale. And then I guess heavier music took over or something, I don't know. But I think the Strokes and the White Stripes kicked something off from America, and then it kind of bled over, and eventually British guitar bands had a shot. Yeah. And we'd kind of been around long enough to have a few steps ahead. We'd already built up a small fan base. We'd done a lot of toilet tours and released EPs and stuff like that. So when it came to the mid-noughties, we were kind of poised to make something of it, And then we had a big hit with this song called Hands of Love, which is Kate Bush cover. And that was like very surreal. Another British band, Franz Ferdinand, had really opened up America to British music, and we went out supporting them around the US, and that opened the door there for us. So we were basically for several years just touring here in America, and I think we did something like 13 tours of America. And at one point we were playing in front of a couple of thousand people a night, in not just in New York and LA, but like Chicago and San Diego. We're kind of we took it as far as we could, and for us it was always really surprising because of our heritage and how our approach to music wasn't commercial. So I feel like to some degree we ended up in a strange position where we had a taste of success and it affected how we made music.
Okay.
Then again, the album we released after our debut album was quite esoteric and dark, so not necessarily commercially.
Yeah.
So we kind of thought, well, it's all right, we're going to we'll make our strange music and everything will be fine. But it didn't really work out that way,
So was that a conscious decision to make it sound different, the first one, and make it sound,
Well, it was 4 years later
yeah.
from when we'd written those songs to when, you know what I mean?
Because you'd been so busy on this train of promoting it.
Well, the first album was basically our first kind of like, not really our first set, but let's say after about a year, the songs we were playing became our first album, and it wasn't released till 3 years later. So you kind of keep those songs, because at that point we didn't even know it was going to be an album. So we were just a band who were playing gigs, and then suddenly, these songs that we'd had for a little while were being recorded properly, and then there was more to that album than Hounds of Love. There was a few of the songs that Meantime and Decent Days and Nights that did really well. And kind of an equivalent of success. But Hounds of Love for that year was one of the kind of big anthems. It was like, but we never released it anywhere else. We never released it as a single in America or in Europe or in Japan. It was very much a British thing. But I wish we had, to be honest with you, because it would have given us that extra kick. Because the problem with touring is that it's really expensive. And to get to that point where you drop off the cliff to where you're making enough profit each show that you can actually sustain it is virtually impossible to achieve. Because there's a certain level where you kind of almost becoming a massive band, where you have to, the costs go massively up. So we experienced that on our second album. We went out and toured it around the UK, and we had 2 tour buses. We had 2 trucks. We had catering. And we were playing in front of not that many more people than we were at the end of our first album. But you kind of you're doing that to kind of to provide a higher quality of show, but your costs go through the roof. So we might have been doing some, fairly well-paid British festival slots, but then we were going around the rest of the world, and we weren't at the same level. So it was kind of like this kind of business that we never really set out. We were never business minded. We were very artistic.
But was that all your decision, or was there any of that, those decisions influenced by outside, by?
Well, I think we just felt like it was something that we should do.
Right.
It's like, okay, so we got, we had 2 guitar techs, someone who was looking after the drums, lights, 2 lighting engineers, a tour manager. It's, it wasn't necessarily cheaper to get a caterer in, because then you've got to get a bus. So we had a crew bus and a band bus, because you've got to that point where you can only really get 10 to 13 people on a tour bus, and once you get up to that point, it's pretty gnarly. I mean, I still love tour buses, but after a while, it's like when you're doing it 9-10 months a year, any space becomes, because it's like being in a submarine, but it was kind of like we ended up basically getting dropped by our record label, which was a subsidiary of Warner Brothers, after our second album, because it didn't commercially surpass our first album. And even though the first album wasn't a huge selling album, because most of the songs are actually quite strange and unique, there was still a kind of the record label could see where the trends were changing. And I think when the Arctic Monkeys happened, that really kind of changed everything for everyone. Yeah. So you had this kind of first wave of, I don't know what you want to call it, the second wave of Britpop, and then Arctic Monkeys arrived, and they kind of galvanized everyone. Kind of, they really captured the zeitgeist of the moment. Yeah. And their music became so in the same way that the Strokes did. It just completely changed the scenery. So suddenly, bands like us and Block Party, and even to some degree Kaiser Chiefs, we suddenly became a band of yesterday, even though we're still making records.
And it was only a few years apart, I mean, MySpace was huge at the time, and Arctic Monkeys were almost not quite a product of MySpace, but they kind of, launched that bubble, which quickly burst. And, a few other artists at the time, Lily Allen, for example, just seemed to kind of come out of nowhere because of that. Could you see that there was, change afoot?
No. I couldn't, mate. No. I'm not going to lie and say I did, because I was, living in this creative bubble of being in the band and being a professional musician. Okay. And that was something that, even though we weren't particularly business-minded, we did want to be doing professional music, and we carried on doing that. There's a bit of a blip, but in terms of the timing, we were happy to kind of end the relationship with Warner's, because I remember a few years before, well, I guess it was on the second album, we went to Japan to do some gigs. I think we'd been a couple of times by then, but we had this lovely woman from the record label who'd take us round, and she said, she kind of was very apologetic. And I was like, what's the matter? She's like, well, we haven't been able to push the album very much because Paris Hilton's releasing an album. And I was like, what? What's she doing? She's like, oh, she's DJing. I'm like, okay, so that's the danger of signing a global deal. We signed to a record label down in London who were essentially owned by Warner's, and then that deal was put around the world. So everywhere around the world, there's all these different people that you've never met who you hope are going to have the same amount of interest, but inevitably, unless something incredible happens, then suddenly they're like, okay, I guess it's a bit like gambling, really. Yeah. It's like, who are going to put the money on the Futureheads there? Oh, it's working. Oh, it's not. Put it on Paris Hilton or whatever. So it becomes very unartistic and kind of easy to... So we were very much like, let's just kind of keep making music, really.
So, did you see it coming? Was there a time before you got dropped that you thought, hold on, we've not had the support, we've not had whatever, this is coming, or...
I don't know. It was very, because you're kind of in the moment, you don't really know what's good. It's kind of chaos, because you might have like, I don't know, you might be just about to go and do a photo shoot for the front cover of a magazine, and then it falls through, and then the next day, Beavis and Butthead are going to use one of your songs and they're going to pay you $25,000. It's like, you kind of get used to this like crazy rhythm. I mean, initially, we were sitting down in a pub in London about to go and sign a record deal with Universal. Sitting in this pub, and we're going to go and do the thing of, drinking the champagne and going out for the expensive meal and signing a record deal and getting an advance. And our manager was like, it's fallen through, We were literally ready to go out, and it had fallen through that afternoon, several hours before we were meant to sign it. So that was not an untypical experience, and it'll be the same now, because it's so tight. These cogs coming into play and working together that you just kind of get used to not taking anything for granted. So when we had. Well, we still have the same management, but one of the guys, he's called Jazz Summers. He passed away now, but he was really good at kind of giving us our confidence back. So when the Universal deal fell through, he picked us up, and then he rang us up actually when we got dropped and said, Barry, I've got some great news. I'm like, what? He's like, you've been dropped. I'm like, what? He's like, we fucking got rid of them. I'm like, okay, that's one way to do it, you know.
So was there a feeling within that, like, you know, at that point you wanted to sever the tie?
Oh, well, when you go to fly to Japan and you've got, there's no pickings there because of Paris Hilton, you're going to start to get a bit annoyed about that. So it wasn't terribly heartbreaking. But I do think we never fully decompressed or discussed our feelings about that, because we just went straight on to forming our own record label and then making new music that were released, and it did relatively well. Yeah. So
obviously this was a new opportunity for the band.
Yeah, it was a new era, but it was like, okay, it went down to a kind of skeleton crew. Still using tour buses, but we didn't have lighting engineer anymore, or 2 techs or 3 techs. It was, you know, it was kind of winding down really.
But were you being, you know, smarter, looking after money as well, and you know, and
it was always very much feast or famine, you know, being a professional musician. It's very difficult to make a good living from art. It really is, especially when, you know, selling that art involves buying gallons of petrol and instruments and paying for specialists to come and work with you. But we got by, you know, and again we were just kind of getting pulled along by the unpredictable but exhilarating experience of being involved in that, and that kind of went on for some time really.
And how was looking back over that time from, you know, those albums? What other things were different? You know, was the songwriting, was the processes of anything else different?
I think quite often when you're making records, if you're working with a producer, they kind of bring that extra flavour, the defining flavour. So the third album was recorded with a really interesting guy called Youth, whose real name's Martin Glover, and he was in a band, a really amazing band called, well, it still is, called Kill and Joke. And they made this really kind of hypnotic, dark punk music coming out of the late 70s into the 80s. And the singer was like a black magician. Youth is a druid. And he'd built this house in Spain, and we recorded our third album called This Is Not the World in Spain on top of a mountain. Right. And we were living in this hotel that was in a valley full of oranges. And it was like, we hired this car and we'd drive up this mountain every day and work from 11 in the morning till 3 a.m. And some days we'd write 3 or 4 songs and record them. I think we went there with 11 songs and we came out with 24. It was crazy, but I guess it's really what we needed. Yeah. Looking back, you know, there's some songs that made it on the album that weren't our best work, but we were very much kind of trying to navigate our way out of this perceived failure and coming back with something. By that point, albums were really a lot less important. And the way, what you learn is, I mean, I can't entirely speak for now, it's probably even more so now, but it's down to songs, singles. So we knew that if we were going to stand a chance of carrying on any further, we needed to come back with at least one song that did the trick, you know. And it was a song called The Beginning of the Twist, which ended up being a song that the football team ran out to, and it was a massive hit in Australia, and it was the biggest, the most played song on Radio 1 daytime of the first 6 months of that year, which is mad really when you listen to Radio 1 now. But I guess, you know, we still had our foot in the door, and we still had the same plugger, and we made this anthem, and it did it, you know, and it kind of floated us up again to some degree in terms of our opportunities were still there. We were still in some kind of decline, but that's normal, you know, like if you think about the Stones or something like that, you know, like they made some great music in the 60s, and that's about it really. And for most of the time, they're just touring to pay for their family's private school fees. You know what I mean? That it's not, they haven't just gone like this.
Well, no, completely opposite now. So, I mean, when you were doing writing Begin the Twist and putting that album together, were you going, that's the one, that's the single? Or?
We just crack on making an album, you know, and you listen back and.
But it does. It you know, immediately kicks in, and that kind of that.
We designed it to be an anthem. Yeah. There's no doubt about it. An indie punk anthem.
Yeah.
And it
where
worked.
the chorus is repeated.
Massive.
Yeah.
And you've got cymbals on the chorus. Yeah. And Youth actually helped us to arrange that, because the original version we had was almost a flip, so that the chorus was really choppy and the verse was a lot more fluid, and he turned it round, and he did some good production with that. And we recorded it on top of a mountain, you know. And it took us around again. And then for the fourth album, we kind of found our artistic confidence again and made this quite progressive record called The Chaos. And it had this song called Heartbeat Song, which is quite poppy really. But that was, again, enough to kind of... Thinking back about the band, one of the truths is that the songs that we had that were successful were more successful than us as a band. So it's like one of those bands where people you play a song and they'll go, I know this one, but they won't necessarily associate it with the band itself, you know, which is just the truth of the matter. So you were kind of, were a big part of the music culture, but didn't gain enough of a cultish, you know, the identity of us was not as powerful as some of the music we released. Yeah. It's just how it goes.
I mean, was that because the catchy ones were so catchy and the ones that weren't as catchy were, you know?
It's just, I don't know. It's just that, I don't know if it's just the name of the band or I don't know. You know, say like the Libertines, that band was like, they were like priests. You know, like their following was so subculturally important that it's almost like they made some great music, definitely, but it almost was less important than them.
Yeah, I mean,
we were like the reverse, where we made these songs that did well, but there was not the quite same intrigue about us.
Yeah, I mean, do you think bands like that kind of have a character and have, you know, call it a gimmick, call it sort of, you know, PR stunts, whatever, things that go on that make the name bigger than you say than the band? You didn't have that at all, you know. Almost an appointment going, you know, like this meeting you had with the Bruces back in the day, and going, you know, the drumming, you went, right, look, you know, don't kind of go for cliches, don't go for...
I think you just I don't think say the Libertines that they were an organic band, but you know that they certainly, all the kind of drugs and the partying thing kind of overshadowed their music. But it didn't really matter, because I don't know, that time in the noughties, indie music was really vibrant and important, you know. So I don't know if it is as important anymore. Something else is. Music has always been important, but this idea of bands, you know, the experience of a band, because now, I mean, we were just talking, you know, about this kind of how music's made, music technology, how it's evolved, and how you don't need a band, you know, to make a record. And the hardest thing about being in a band is dealing with other people. So if your band can stay together for more than 5 minutes, you've probably succeeded. It's hard, you know, but we managed to take it to a certain point. But then it became apparent to me that we needed to take a break from doing the band, because I started to feel really insecure about my things like my qualifications, my opportunities, because I felt like we could have continued from like, you know, when was it, 2013 onward, and made more records, but I wasn't feeling happy about the lifestyle, about the insecurity, about the trying to make a living from art. It wore me down, because like for a few reasons, but predominantly because I'd been through the process of making albums by that point quite a few times, and I just got tired of it, really, because I knew there was a cycle there. And then there's this whole thing of like putting all of your love and your energy into this album, but albums are becoming less important, and then releasing it and hoping for some kind of feedback, and it kind of that vulnerability, I couldn't take it anymore. I just couldn't do it. And I'm not saying that I was carrying everyone in the band. I wasn't. It was always a group effort. You know, we all had to be away from home. We all did the recording sessions, and just, you know, I was writing more songs, but that didn't really matter. It was more like I felt like the spiritual energy of the band had come to an end.
I mean, did the others feel a bit of this?
I think maybe our bass player Jaff was on the same page as me. I don't think Dave and Ross so much, but you know, it was always very much a gang mentality. So,
I mean, was any of it just evolution? You know, getting a bit older and evolving from being what you've been in this position from teenagers.
Yeah, I think it was a bit of a kind of lifetime landmark thing, but I really struggled, you know. We were doing a festival, which we did it 5 times, but I remember in 2012, I was trying to kind of sustain the band. We released an a cappella album and enjoyed doing it, but then I remember it was really hard because we made this vocal album and did a load of gigs with acoustic instruments, and we loved it, but it was very much like an excursion. It was almost like a side project. And then we came to make a new album, as we did, you know, kind of in the cycle of creativity, and we were hiring a room and we were putting the electric guitars back on and trying to play, and I was just really struggling, you know, to find a way of making it work. And then the festival was really stressful, and it just kind of got to a point where it started to really negatively affect my mental health. And I ended up having to go into hospital a few times, and it was very difficult time. And I remember going into hospital, coming out and just trying to kind of crack on as normal, and it became apparent that I couldn't. So then the second time I went in hospital,
because you weren't ready to
I just couldn't get back on the ride, you know, like I'd already, I guess, deep inside kind of severed myself from that type of. And
you felt that everyone else was expecting you to just jump back on.
I don't know. I would say more like I wanted to be able to just kind of carry on, but I couldn't. I'd become quite a strange person by that point. I was very much like it's quite poignant now, actually, because there's a lot of conspiracy theories kicking about now. And 10 years ago, if this pandemic had happened 10 years ago, I probably would have tried to get myself to America to storm the Capitol building. I went right down the rabbit hole of all that stuff, you know. It feels like quite mild back then. But I was obsessed with religion. I was obsessed with numerology. I was, you know, I joined a secret society based around meditation techniques from ancient Egypt. I went to the Arizona desert to this like this kind of retreat, spiritual retreat, and my mind really started to go into strange places, combined with all of the pressures that I was trying to deny I was under, just culminated in me essentially having a pretty massive nervous breakdown. But I was still trying to kind of, and then suddenly you're like, my God, like you start thinking about the past and you realise how fast it goes, you know. Yeah. So I was from being a 19-year-old young man to like a 31-year-old bloke in a psychiatric hospital, just thinking, what the fucking hell happened there? You know what I mean? And not actually being able to make sense. So then I went into this like massive post-traumatic stress period. I say massive, it was only a few years, but I was very unwell, in and out of hospital. Magical thinking was still going on. Yeah. But I was starting to come out of it. But it was very strange and difficult. And on my second trip, second stay in hospital, I was in there for a couple of months, I decided to call it quits on the band. Mm-hmm. So they came in to the shared kitchen area of Cherry Knowles Hospital, and I basically, said I need to stop. And they were very supportive. Yeah. But I think obviously my bandmates are lovely people, and I love them very much, and it's reciprocated, So they were obviously very worried about me, but also loving about it. Yeah. So that they cracked on to their own thing, and it was strange actually, because as soon as I had that conversation with them, I went back into my room in hospital, and like I felt very different, I was like, and I'm not saying the band itself made me ill, but it was more my mind had become ill, and the band was something that was exacerbating that. So once I kind of put a stop, what eventually became a pause, I was able to actually begin to think about who I was, what I was, what was I going to do, but in a less of a stressed manner, because I was in a psychiatric hospital. So,
well, it was another one part of that you could park, or you could release and move on from it to some degree.
There was enough of a gap there so that a kind of a new idea could emerge, and it was nothing to do with music.
I mean, at the time, a lot of people probably won't even know that you've been in hospital, although you were always very open about it. Yeah. After it, when you brought your album out, but what I'm going to say what was going through your mind, but kind of what did you think was going to happen, or did you just think, look, I need a bit of time to myself, I need to, and get ready for sort of the next chapter, or what did you?
Just desperation, It's like, well, what are you going to do? You can't leave this building. I mean, in hospital there was all sorts of people. There's a lot of just old men who couldn't look after themselves anymore, but they weren't physically ill. They'd become mentally ill because of a lack of structure in their life. Yeah. And there was young people who were psychotic because of drugs. There were alcoholics. There was schizophrenic people who had trauma when they were a kid, and it was like, well, how do I fit into this? Yeah. I was like buying everyone Chinese takeaways on a Friday night and drinking licorice tea, thinking, and everyone's just thinking, who's this person?
Was there any influences from, were you looking at people and go, wow, kind of, trying to dissect and go, as a part of that? Am I going through part of that? Yeah. Did any of it influence your kind of, your return to health, or did any of it make it worse at all?
Well, to some degree, it made me feel like I was in a much better position than some of them. But in another way, I was kind of like, God, I'm really crazy, because I'm a lot more eloquent than these people. I'll tell you a funny story, actually. On my third stay in the hospital, I was really kind of towards the end of it, I was coming out. I was able to go out on day release and stuff like that. And actually, I was preparing to do a gig, a charity gig, organised by Ross's partner Sam, and it was at Newcastle University, and it was called Stars in Their Eyes.
Okay. And you playing solo?
No. We did a tribute night, and the Futureheads was Queen,
right?
Field music with Fleetwood Mac's. Who else was doing it? Frankie and the Heartstrings with David Bowie, and everyone was in costume, right? And we'd been rehearsing. I'd be going out to rehearse and coming back into hospital, you know. And then it came to the night of the gig, and I got interviews on Look North, right? As Brian May and all of me fellow patients were watching the news. So I left, and then I was on the television with a wig on, and they were like, "What the fuck?" You know? But it was actually one of the most amazing gigs I've ever done, because Jaff was Freddie Mercury. It was incredible.
I mean, did any of those other patients, you know, understand? Did they see a difference between, you know, this very bright, creative, lost soul, as it were, and these people who were possibly further on and had been and knew that they were unwell?
Yeah.
Did they see a difference?
I think so. I remember someone asked us once if I worked there. Someone who had just come in.
Yeah.
But there was this other lad came in. He was having a schizophrenic episode, and I walked through the door, and he came over to us, and he said, "Are you Jesus?" And that was a really bad thing for me to hear at the time, you know, because I was partially convinced I was. You know what I mean? So it's like, but when I realised that I was kind of potentially going to be someone, what's called a revolving door mental health patient, it really scared me that 2-3 years down the line I could be back in there in the same spot, completely broken.
Yeah.
You know, I had to do something about it. So I had to make some changes.
Okay. What did you do?
I got a job working as a chef, as a pastry chef, and I started teaching.
Yeah. So was that, you know, how did you think of that? And I know, you know, you love your food, but was it that you needed something mundane, something kind of more routine, or was it,
I think I like the idea of doing something creative, but that was out of the way, so in backstage, so to speak. So you're still getting that kind of egotistical payoff when you get back an empty plate, which is a bit like a round of applause, but you're not under the pressure of selling the food or something, you know what I mean? But I'd also become really interested in food through travelling and eating Korean food and Japanese food, and I became very passionate about it, you know, whilst doing the band. Yeah,
because you were going to do an apprenticeship with Junipers, and
I did.
Kind of,
I started it. But after, you know, apprenticeships are very poorly paid, and they're usually aimed at people who are teenagers. So I was happy to just be getting paid, to be honest with you, because the making a living from art's really hard. But for me, it was like, this is quite a simple setup. I come in, I make Scotch eggs, I make sausage rolls, and I get paid. I'm like, I can live with that. But then I thought, I don't know if I can live on this, you know. Yeah. So I started doing a few little private tuition lessons, guitar, piano, and I was earning in an hour what I was earning in a day. Yeah. So I thought, this works. But then I thought, I don't know, man, like getting burnt all the time, you know, making 250 Yorkshire puddings. I thought, nah, and actually for about 3-4 months I didn't cook anything. Once I left Junipers, I didn't cook anything.
Because I remember that little night you put on it, what was bar one? Upstairs, and you had all these different flavoured popcorns. I'm sure it was like smoky bacon with popcorn. You know, obviously playing some Ivor Cutler videos, and you know, you sort of love of folk music. So there was there must have been. You must have just thought, like, you know, I can't.
I was trying to somehow remain it creative, but without the personal psychic load. So you kind of trying different things out, you know. Hospitality. It was my mother who kind of influenced me to look into teaching, you know, because for me it was like, doing private tuition's great. I've taught grades and stuff like that, but I prefer to kind of sit with a curious young musician, usually young, but it could be any age, and just kind of try and just plug them right into the real process of becoming a musician, which really is more than learning how to play scales. It's a lot more than that. You know, you have to explain to people why it's important to learn scales and what they are, and that kind of the flexibility of teaching in that way really appeals to me. So I was kind of finding my way into education, started doing well with the private tuition, and then because of that I got offered a job in a college as a lecturer, and I just thought, man, it's like I'm so jammy, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't have any teaching qualifications, I didn't have a degree, but because I'd been in this band and I was confident enough to stand in a room and teach anything, really. But you were talking about earlier about sometimes we have to just busk, especially with teaching, because you don't know who you're going to be teaching. I turned up at this, it was at Eastern College, and they just basically said, just go in there and your students are going to come in. And I'm like, who are they? You know, what we're going to do? And it turned out I'd signed up to do a performing arts course, level 3. I'm like, they're all actors. What we're going to do?
So what did you do?
Maybe this time I just did loads of short tunes with them, taught them some folk music, and got them active, creative, you know. There's no songwriting involved. It was just, I was basically a jukebox for them to practice, and there was no pressure on like, oh, where's your scheme of work, or, you know, what's going to be the learning outcomes. It's like, outcomes. you didn't even tell me what course it was, you know. I did that for a bit, got offered a really great job at a primary school in Sunderland, where I was like the music man. So I went, you know, 9 months. 9 months after coming out of hospital, I'm standing with 200 kids doing hymn practice. It was like, wow, this teaching thing's really interesting. And what was kind of ironic was because every day, actually, I was doing music a lot more intensely than I'd ever done with the band. Because when you're doing a band professionally, you're basically an automaton. You've got your set list and you perform it every night, and it's great. And it's fantastic, but there's really no flexibility there, unless you make an improvised music, which doesn't tend to allow you to tour the world, you know. So it's like I really started to get super interested in music, more than I'd ever been, and I'm like, wow, I'm actually becoming a better musician. And it's very hard to do that, you know, once you've kind of reached a certain level of being able to get on stage. That's good enough. But how do you take it even further? I think you do it through teaching. So then I started really passionately making kind of solo music, and ended up releasing an album which kind of touches on my struggles that I had in years previous via the amazing instrument that is the piano, which I'd got into through, you know, getting paid well to sit and teach people how to play piano and guitar, and teachers kind of saved me, you know. So eventually I ended up at this place in Gateshead. I'll tell you what I did that was quite interesting. I got commissioned by Durham Council to go into Franklin Prison and do songwriting sessions with some of the life sentence serving prisoners.
How did that go?
I mean, I keep on forgetting I'd actually did that, but it was unbelievable. I was so embarrassed because the first session I was really nervous about going in, because it was in what's called the pipe unit, which is the psychiatric part.
I've been in there. Yeah.
Have you?
Yeah.
Right in the middle, right?
Yeah. I mean, I found going in and first of all security, which it took forever. Thinking, every time someone's got to come in, you've got to do this. But it took me ages to just get through in my head that these people were in for life, and life means life, but the minute you kind of get in front of people, you kind of drop that to some degree, and they told you, look, don't drop your guard, don't do this. But that whole process is, these are in there in this strange kind of wall, big, massive, must have been really strange. So how long were you doing that?
I did it, I think, 4 times. It was this short-term project, and I don't know why, but the night before the first session, I started watching this program on Netflix. Was it Netflix? Prison Break. What a stupid thing to do.
Is that your research?
I was like, all right, okay. I don't know why I did that. I guess kind of morbid curiosity, stupidity. But I was so nervous that I slept through my alarm the next day. So I had to ring the contact there and explain I'd slept in. And I said, look, if you just want to get someone else to do these sessions, I won't be offended. I feel extremely embarrassed. I'm not usually late for things. And he's like, no, it's fine. We'll do it next week, same time. So next week came, set me alarm, drove out, on the A690 coming off. Thinking, where am I? It's like going through the woods, and then you suddenly come to this kind of like town, little village, and then there's this structure, and it's like, whoa, man, like imagine living near here or something like that. And so I got to it's like getting on an airplane, isn't it? The security. But there's this the first bit before you have to take your shoes off and stuff, there's like a kind of sign in bit. It's like, right, let's see your ID, please. And as I put my hand in my pocket to get my wallet, I remembered, I'd had to send my driving license away, because when I learned how to drive, because of my the fact that I'd been in a psychiatric hospital, my driving license was only valid for a year, and then it was 2 years, and then it was, you know what I mean? So it's like, just in case you have a breakdown or something like that, and you've still got a license. So it was under review, and I'd basically turned up to the most highly protected prison in the country to try to walk in without any ID. So they sent us away. So I rang it up again and said, look, I'm going to resign from this. It was like, no, we're going to make it happen. And I felt so embarrassed, even more, driving home, ringing Cindy, just like, you're not going to believe this. But then a week later.
So when you did do it, what was the response?
It was amazing. There were 7 participants, but only really two of them were engaged.
Yeah, in music.
Well, there were a lot of them in the room, but we're writing these songs around the what was it again? I'm trying to remember the name of it. It was to do with the Second World War. Okay. No, it'd been the First World War, in Ypres, on the beach.
Yeah. Was that planned, or did that?
Yeah, the commission came. Yeah. It was something to do with commemorating this battle, but tying it in with the prison system. Yeah. So I went in with a keyboard and I told me kind of drawings and stuff like that, and explaining. I was like their composer, and they were writing poetry. Yeah. And there was a serial killer in there who was particularly creative, and he'd written all these poems about this battle. And I used some of his poems to write songs, and I did a suite of songs, and I explained to them, if we want to write, I don't know, using the emotional context of harmony. So it's like, this is dissonance, this is violence, this is peace, and using these, you know, these kind of triadic music, or you can extend it and make it more complicated. And it was kind of like they were quite interested, but it was amazing commission. Loved it. The psychological kind of realization was as you're going through these gates, this key, and you think every one of those is impossible to open. And there's 10 of them between there and there, and you live in there in a little room, you know. It's like, wow, made us think a lot about crime and punishment, and, you know, it was very stimulating.